The news is nothing but a TV show that pushes propaganda on the masses. I'm John, this is Narcoleptic Rant, let's go. Look, the news is nothing but a TV show. It's used to push propaganda and division, to keep us all fighting against each other so that we're not actually paying attention to what the government is doing behind our backs. For years now, they have caught the news being straight up scripted. It doesn't matter what news station it is, they're saying the exact same thing in unison. I mean, check this out.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to your doorstep.
The company is keeping employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
It spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Amazon says it has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
That's just blatantly scripted. And people have been catching this for years and creating these compilations like this. It doesn't matter what news station it is, from Fox to CNN. They're all doing this. It's all propaganda. They're doing this to keep us all divided. And ever since about 2012 is when it got real bad. The U.S. repeals the propaganda ban, spreads government-made news to Americans. All right, for decades, a so-called anti-propaganda law prevented the U.S. government's mammoth broadcasting arm from delivering programming to American audiences. But on July 2nd of 2012, that came silently to an end with the implementation of a new reform passed in January. The result, an unleashing of thousands of hours per week of government-funded radio and TV programs for domestic consumption, in a reform initially criticized as a green light for U.S. domestic propaganda efforts. So what just happened? And they go over how Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Middle East broadcasting networks, they could only be listened to outside of the country, and now they're going to be able to be listened to inside the country. Yeah, well, they always guise it in something that sounds good in order to do something bad. And I'm going to show you, let's go ahead and go to congress.gov and show you the actual Smith Modernization Act of 2012. All right. And it says, to amend the United States Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948 to authorize the domestic dissemination of information and material about the United States intended primarily for foreign audiences and for other purposes. But anyway, let's go on down. I want you to see something right here. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit the Department of State or the Broadcasting Board of Governors from engaging in any medium or form of communication, either directly or indirectly, because a United States domestic audience is or may be thereby exposed to program material, or based on a presumption of such exposure. They can freely do whatever they want. And back when Conan O'Brien had his show, he was also catching, well, his team probably, was also catching all these news corporations doing this scripted news crap. Check it out.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
Well, a child's happiness is priceless, right? Especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday. You like that?
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take the spring out of the step of the Easter Bunny this year.
I scream, you scream. You know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, you know the rest. Well, I scream, you scream, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest. I scream, you scream, well, you know the rest.
Got it. I scream, you scream, you know the rest.
I scream, you scream, we all know the rest of it, right?
And I just can't take any more of that. Now, I know those are kind of funny examples, and it's got this laugh track behind it, but that's because that was from Conan O'Brien's show. But I don't care what the examples are. It's showing that the news is literally sitting here reading a script. What about that makes you think of the news? That makes me think TV show. That's exactly what this is. It's nothing but a TV show. They treat the world as a stage. Here's a propaganda piece right here from Forbes. Did CDC propose putting high-risk people into COVID-19 camps? Here's what they actually said, by Bruce Y. Lee. And obviously, from the title of this article, they make it sound like that wasn't what was said. They imply that with the title of this article, that they did not say the CDC proposed putting high-risk people into COVID-19 camps. But they did, and this is a propaganda piece, and Bruce Y. Lee, who wrote this article, is going to prove that to you now. All right, there's Candace Owens, and Bruce Lee writes, well, here's a campy interpretation of what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention posted on its website last year. On Monday, a political commentator, Candace Owens, tweeted that the CDC actually put together a document to discuss putting high-risk people into camps to shield low-risk people from them. End quote. Bruce Lee writes, in case you were wondering whether this was a joke, the next sentence in Owens' tweet was, quote, no, this is not a joke, and yes, every single person who has made a reference to 1930s Germany is vindicated. Bruce Lee writes, really? Every single person who has compared COVID-19 precautions to what the Nazis did in Germany in the 1930s is vindicated? I mean, that part was opinion. The first part was fact. You don't know the difference between opinion and fact? Bruce Lee? And he continues to write, and perhaps to put some emphasis, she began the whole tweet with a phrase that rhymed with goalie Brad Pitt, but wasn't the kind of thing that you might utter in super polite company. Here's her tweet in all its glory with the expletive scratched out. And there it is. You can read it if you want. First part, true. Second part, opinion. Second part doesn't really matter. Who cares what the opinion is? The fact is, the CDC actually put together a document to discuss putting high-risk people into camps to shield low-risk people from them. That is a fact. But he's going to sit here and continue to try and act like it's not. She even put the link in her little tweet or whatever it is. As you can see, Owens included a link to the CDC website, which he did right here as well, that she was tweeting about. The one that supposedly discussed putting high-risk people into camps to shield low-risk people from them. Owens wasn't the only one on social media to spread such an interpretation of the CDC website. For example, this person, it's a bit too small for me. I can't read that, but whoever, they put the same thing out pretty much, and somebody responded with, you have not read it, have you? That person did not read it. The person that literally wrote, "You have not read it, have you?" did not read it. Check it out. All right. And according to Jessica McDonald, writing for factcheck.org, don't listen to any of these fact checkers because they're all propagandists as well. The Epic Times posted on Instagram the following. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention detailed in a July 26 report the options for creating camps to isolate Americans amid the COVID-19 outbreak, along with the headline, CDC virus camps? Putting people into camps assuming that they're not band camps or circus camps doesn't sound good. It may evoke images of what the U.S. government did during the Second World War, throwing innocent Japanese Americans into internment camps just because of their racial background. Why you brought that up, I don't know, because it's already been likened to Germany. But Bruce Lee, he's one of these people that's trying to push outrage. And so he just added that in to make you outraged. He could have just stuck with the whole Germany thing, but he didn't. He didn't. All right, he continues. But there's one itty-bitty problem with Owen's claim. The CDC document that Owens referenced did not say anything about putting people into camps. Not even close, he says. Not even close. And he goes on, when claiming that a document supports what you are claiming, it's kind of important to actually read the document carefully. Otherwise, it can be like citing the police's Every Breath You Take and saying to your love or interest, see, this song shows how I really feel about you. You may want to take a closer look at what Sting was actually singing about before suggesting it in any way. Every move you make, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Similarly, the CDC website entitled Interim Operational Considerations for Implementing the Shielding Approach to Prevent COVID-19 Infections in Humanitarian Settings starts off by saying that it presents considerations from the perspective of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, for implementing the shielding approach in humanitarian settings as outlined in guidance documents focused on camps, displaced populations in low-resource settings. That's the very first bleeping sentence, Bruce Lee writes. If you are going to make claims about what a document indicates, at least read the first sentence. You read the first fucking sentence, Bruce. You read the first sentence. Look at this. You're going to sit here and tell me that it said nothing about camps. Just a couple paragraphs up. The CDC document that Owens referenced did not say anything about putting people in camps. Not even close. Not even close, he says. Not even close. And yet, it says camps. Right there. Camps. And then you're going to go on to say, just because the document mentions the word camp doesn't mean that it's about putting you in one. Dude. So 1 second you're going to say it doesn't say camp, not even close. And then right after you copy and paste the quote from the CDC website, you straight up say, just because it says camp, blah, blah, blah. In the same article. You sound like a hypocrite. I would think you're stupid if I didn't think you were a propagandist. But you are. And you need to be fired. You need to be fired immediately. Look, all right, let's go to the CDC website, all right? Yep, operational considerations for humanitarian settings. And here's the quote that he copied and pasted into his article. This document presents considerations from the perspective of the CDC for implementing the shielding approach in humanitarian settings as outlined in guidance documents focused on camps, displaced populations, and low-resource settings. This approach has never been documented and has raised questions and concerns among humanitarian partners who support response activities in these settings. The purpose of this document is to highlight potential implementation challenges of the shielding approach from CDC's perspective and guide thinking around implementation on the absence of empirical data. So they want to implement this without any empirical data. Considerations are based on current evidence known about the transmission and severity of coronavirus disease, 2019 COVID-19, and may need to be revised as more information becomes available. Please check the CDC website periodically for updates. What is the shielding approach? The shielding approach aims to reduce the number of severe COVID-19 cases by limiting contact between individuals at a higher risk of developing severe disease and the general population. High-risk individuals would be temporarily relocated to a safe or green zone established at the household, neighborhood, camp, sector, or community level, depending on the context and setting. They would have minimal contact with family members and other low-risk residents. That is from the Centers for Disease Control. All right? I mean, this is just sick. Straight up propaganda in your face. They do not care. They write these articles knowing you're going to read that headline and not care about anything else. You might read one paragraph in there and forget everything else. Oh, they know what they're talking about because they have this job. They're a journalist. They're not journalists. They are not journalists. And here's one last example of fake news that is probably the worst example I've ever seen. And by worst, I mean probably best, because they are sitting here straight up talking about fake news and how it's a detriment to our society and blah, blah, blah. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
The El Paso, Las Cruces communities.
Eastern Iowa communities.
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 No, they are the danger to our democracy. I mean, this has got to stop. They are a small cog in what is ripping this country apart, making us all hate each other, keeping us divided so we're not seeing what the government, the people who are pulling their strings, are doing. Obviously, someone's pulling their strings, otherwise they wouldn't all be saying the same thing. Now, I could understand if you were to... news is news. If something big happens, multiple news outlets are going to cover that. But they're not going to cover it word for word via script that who knows gave to them. This is the Narcoleptic Rant. Thanks for joining me. Y'all have a good one.